Sup, guys? It's Toad back with you again. I had one play yesterday, which was the Detroit Tigers split bet on the run line and money line, and they won by exactly one. Which I'll take it because they were losing 3-0 in the middle of the game, and they made a nice comeback. They had the better of the bullpen scenario apparently, and were able to get the win in the end. So the money line bet part of it cashed, and the run line did not. Which, as I said, when that happens and you split the bet, because you pay less, because it's plus money on the run line part of it, it winds up being a slight win. So that's what happened with me yesterday. It was a slight win. Not terrible. We can move on to today. We'll talk about this baseball card. This is the time of year, man. This is the final series for each of these teams in the Major League Baseball season. Most teams are eliminated now, but you still have some heated wild card races, mostly in the National League is where it's still really up for grabs. It's the type of spot, like these are the types of spots where you want to look for teams that are definitely going to be motivated against teams that aren't, basically. Like motivation definitely factors in quite a bit in these final games here. Let's get right into it, I guess, because there are a couple of scenarios that I'll talk about. And you have a lot of teams with starting pitchers that are just not even decided yet. So we don't even know what's going on. It's hard to handicap some of these games where you don't even know who some of these pitchers are. Dodgers have not listed a starter yet, but I believe they just clinched the division last night, maybe because they were able to beat San Diego to finish that series off. I'm pretty sure the Dodgers have sealed up that division. I think they're up more than 3 games now with 3 games exactly left. They're having to go to Colorado, and it's a spot where LA might really not care about this game much anymore, but Cal Quantrill is pitching for Colorado, and he's not their worst pitcher, but he also doesn't have good numbers against LA either. Obviously, I'm not going to touch this game where there's questionable motivation going on there. I will say that Dodgers, and same with the Yankees, where the Yankees also clinched the division last night. So maybe they were over-celebrating a little bit too, and they might be coming into this game a little bit overconfident, maybe, or in a little bit of a letdown scenario, let's say, because they really don't need this game. The Yankees, there is a line on this because we know what the starting pitching matchup is, as I'm bouncing all over the place here. So I lean against the Yankees, and it does look like the market is also against them. I don't have a play on this one, but this was close to making my card just because the Yankees, what else do they have to play for? They just finished the division off. They really don't have much to play for. What's up, Hooplehead? What's going on, man? Good morning. Yankees, yeah, so they really don't have much motivation coming into this game. Pittsburgh, maybe they will be slightly motivated just because they get to play one of the top teams in Major League Baseball to finish off the season, and maybe they'll want to do something and get some wins here near the end. Yankees, I don't know what the seeding situation is right now. I don't know if they're the 1 seed still right now. They probably are, but I saw some history where since the wild card has expanded to 3 teams in Major League Baseball, those wild cards play like an extra wild card playoff, and then they have the wild card series. While the teams that are the top 2 seeds in the league tend to just be sitting around for an extra series, waiting for that team to come through. And those teams actually don't do well. It's actually surprising. The 1 seeds I think are actually only 5-13 in those series since the playoffs have expanded or something like that, which is kind of crazy. So I think that extra rest actually tends to hurt those 1 seeds. So that's something to just keep in mind as we move into the playoffs here, where the team that wins in the wild card round, they get that nervousness out of the way. They get some wins under their belt in the playoffs, start some momentum. So they actually get to carry that momentum into the next series, even though I don't consider baseball to be that much of a momentum sport. That does apparently appear to be the case in those series. Those wild card teams do tend to have a little bit of an advantage. I think a lot of the wildcard teams have actually made the World Series round as well. And as far as the 1 seeds are concerned, I think it's mostly been Houston who's been the team as a 1 seed who's actually continued to do well. I think they made the World Series twice as a 1 seed, and most of the other teams have not done as well. Yankees are sitting at -173. They're public, 73% of the tickets. Public not being fazed by the fact that the Yankees don't have that much to play for in this last series here because they've already wrapped up the division. 79% of the cash on the other side in Pittsburgh, however. Yankees have Carlos Rodon pitching, and he is not one of their best starters. Even though those numbers aren't bad this season, really. But certainly he's not their best pitcher, and Yankees look like they've lost Nestor Cortez to injury as well, and it seems like it's questionable when he's even going to come back. So we'll see what happens with this Yankees starting pitching rotation. Rodon actually has bad numbers against the Pittsburgh Pirates as well. So I think there are multiple factors that would put me on the Pittsburgh side in this game. The motivation and I think the starting pitching matchup actually are both in favor of the Pirates. Rodon has allowed a 364 batting average and 945 OPS and 33 at-bats to these Pirates hitters. And not very good, not good stats. And then Pirates have Jared Jones pitching, who his ERA has unfortunately gone up over 4, but he's still a good pitcher, man, even though he had that bad outing his last time out. It was at Cincinnati. I don't know if we can take that much away from it. He hasn't been quite as good since he's come back from injury, but he is still a pretty good young pitcher who hasn't put up that many innings yet this season. And against the Yankees, I'm pretty confident the Yankees have never faced him before. I guess Jazz Chisholm has faced him and is 0 for 2 with 2 strikeouts and a walk off him. But Jones has essentially never been seen before by the Yankees offense, so he should have maybe a little bit of a built-in edge there as well for that reason. And the Yankees played yesterday, which is when they clinched the division by beating Baltimore in a divisional series, blowing out Baltimore, although Pittsburgh actually also played yesterday. I didn't realize they did. So not really that much of a rest edge there. You could look into what happened with the bullpens yesterday to see if if either team has a bullpen edge or not here in this game as far as the rest is concerned. The Yankees didn't use much of theirs, a few relief pitchers there. Pittsburgh in a loss to Milwaukee yesterday. I don't know what they did. They used more of their relief pitchers, so their bullpen is in worse shape than the Yankees is probably, with 5 relief pitchers used. I don't think either bullpen has really been doing that well recently, but my lean situationally, the situational spot still is in favor of Pittsburgh there. Running down the rest of the card here, we did have a couple of teams that were returning home from road trips, but I just don't know if there's any real angle there. The Anaheim Angels is one of them, or the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. They had a 2-series road trip, but they actually got swept by the Chicago White Sox. That's embarrassing. And they played yesterday, so they don't have one of those dreaded days off, which tends to exacerbate the return home spot. But I don't think it's a good spot anyway on the return home situation. They're facing Jacob deGrom, who just was reactivated for Texas, and he only has 1 or 2 starts under his belt, I think, since then. So we don't really know what we're going to get out of the aging deGrom at this point. His stats overall are good against Anaheim. And both of these teams played yesterday, actually, so there's not that much of a rest edge there. I don't think either, although Anaheim in the return home spot, a little bit worse situationally. deGrom has good numbers against them over his career at least, but a lot of them are in the past. And Reed Detmers, the younger pitcher pitching for Anaheim, has had an up and down season. He's shown flashes of being pretty good. His stats against Texas are actually not bad. So we'll see what happens there. And then Oakland, I think Oakland is in a letdown spot, man, but we don't know who Seattle's pitcher is going to be in this game. Oakland, I totally neglected to look at the spot last night, man. Oakland played their final game in the Oakland Coliseum yesterday. I neglected to even look at that in my handicapping when I went through it yesterday. It could have been a spot to bet Oakland there, the extra motivation, playing their last game in Oakland, which I did bet on the Oakland Raiders in that spot against the Denver Broncos back when they had their final home game, and I got a win on that one. That worked out well. It's an added motivational spot there, and it was for Oakland yesterday too, at least to the point where they were able to get the 1-run win over the Rangers. So after that, they could be in a letdown spot, man. I mean, that's an emotional high. You go out with a win. You see your home fans in Oakland for the last time. I think Oakland could be in a pretty bad spot here going on the road to Seattle, but Seattle's also a recently eliminated team, and we don't even know who Seattle's starting pitcher is going to be yet, so it's hard to handicap this. J.P. Sears pitching for Oakland. He actually has good numbers against Seattle. So the starting pitching matchup looks like it won't be that heavily in favor of Seattle, even though most of their starting pitchers are pretty good. But that's going to be a no-go for me in that one. And then San Francisco is returning home for a 3-series road trip that took them to the East Coast and then Central Time Zone, and then, I guess, Mountain Time Zone, Pacific Time Zone. I don't even know where Arizona is, but they had a long, extended road trip there with 3 series, so I don't think they're in a very good spot. They also had a day off in between yesterday. They're facing St. Louis, who did have to play yesterday. So St. Louis did use some of their relief pitchers yesterday, and it was in a dreaded high elevation environment in Colorado, and St. Louis is coming to the Pacific Coast out of that. So neither team is really in a great travel spot. This is Miles Mikolas against Landon Raup. Mikolas actually has okay numbers in his career against San Francisco, but he's the much older pitcher who's much more familiar to the opposing hitters. Landon Raup, I think, might be a rookie, or he's a young starting pitcher for San Francisco. So I believe he's never been seen before by St. Louis, or almost none of their hitters have ever seen him before. So San Francisco might have a little bit of an edge in the starting pitching matchup there because Mikolas just isn't really that good, but does have good numbers against San Francisco. So that's a game. Also not going to get involved in that game. I did have one other lean that was on an under in one of these games, and it was not on what I'll call the disappointment series in Tampa, Boston. Both teams just got eliminated within the last couple of days. I don't know what to expect out of that series, man. Two teams with not a lot of motivation left here. I don't even know if we should comment on that game because there's just nothing left in that game. As far as the spots are concerned for the wild card, I guess I'll mention that in a second, but let me see here. Oh, the under, I think I do kind of lean to the under in Baltimore and Minnesota, so I guess I will talk about the AL wild card situation right now. Minnesota, they're almost out of it, man. This is a situation where Detroit has risen up out of nowhere, and now the final two wild card spots in the AL are Detroit and Kansas City, who I believe are both tied 3 games ahead of Minnesota. So I think essentially Minnesota's going to have to sweep this last series against Baltimore, even though Baltimore already has clinched a wild card spot. So Baltimore doesn't really have much left to play for either. Minnesota will have to sweep that series and have Kansas City or Detroit get swept. And, like, good luck if you want Detroit to get swept by Chicago, okay? By the White Sox. But, hey, the White Sox just swept Anaheim, so maybe they'll finish off the series with a 6-game win streak. Highly doubt it. So Minnesota's in not a very good spot there. And Kansas City could possibly get swept by Atlanta, though, to be honest. So maybe there is a little bit of hope for Minnesota. This game does look like it could be a pitching duel here. Cade Povich, I mean, I know his numbers suck. They don't look very good, but he's a young guy, and he's been pitching better recently. He's having a good month, man, with a high strikeout rate, 30-7 strikeout walk rate, and a 3.27 ERA in the month of September. Not facing the easiest offenses, though. He didn't do well against Boston, but he faced Detroit twice. He hasn't been that bad, and I believe Minnesota's never seen him before. I think he's in his rookie season, so he might have a little bit of an extra edge there just because Minnesota hasn't seen him before. He's in better recent form than what his overall stats would suggest. Pablo Lopez on the Minnesota side has an ERA not suggestive of what he actually is. He's way better than what his ERA looks, with a much better whip at 1.18. He's a good pitcher, and he's coming off a really ugly start at Boston, but he was pitching well prior to that. Strikeout walk ratio still good this month, 26-5, so I think he will bounce back from that. He's a veteran pitcher at this point. He's used to doing this. One bad start I don't think is going to send him into a tailspin or anything like that, especially with playoffs potentially on the line here. And he has good numbers against Baltimore in his career, too. And 52 at-bats. He's held them to a 154 average and 474 OPS. So he has really held Baltimore's hitters in check. So Lopez looks good in that game as well. So I lean to the under in that game more so than the side, even though Minnesota is going to be the motivated team, and they're sitting at minus 165, and Baltimore actually is public with 73% of the tickets, 53% of the cash. So you have a public road underdog with nothing left to play for against the Minnesota team, who should be much more motivated here, and that's why the odds makers are telling you Minnesota has the edge here. But so do I want to lay minus 165? Not really. But that would be the side if you force me to pick a side in that one. It would be to the Minnesota side. And the market does appear to be indicating on it, with the public not caring that Baltimore has nothing to play for and not even caring that they have the worst starting pitcher here. But I like the under in this one a little bit better. Still just sitting at 8.5, juice to the over, 67% of the tickets and 99% of the cash on the under. Probably not a totally accurate number there, but the market does appear to be at least having some early indicators that may be indicating towards an under in that one, in agreement with me. What's up, Joe? The next death pool, you think Diddy? Maybe. I mean, if that happens, he did not kill himself, man. Diddy didn't kill himself. We can put that out there in advance. The celebrity death pool, very hard to do, man, because you know it's going to be some celebrity that you're not even really thinking of right now will be the next one to go. You just got to look at the whoever the oldest most unhealthy ones are. It's going to be one of them. And then looking at some of these motivational disparities here real quick before I have to hit college football quickly. Mets, Milwaukee. So the National League is where we really have a huge, crazy wild card scenario here, man, where all three teams that are fighting for the final two spots, because the Padres, they're going to be in one of the wild card spots, and they're facing one of the teams that's fighting harder for a wild card spot. So I'll mention that next in a second. I'll talk about both games. We have a situation where the Padres, I believe, have clinched a playoff spot now. I think they're ahead of all of those teams, or at least one of those teams by enough that they've clinched one. The other three teams are all within a game of each other, with Arizona and the Mets tied one game ahead of the Atlanta Braves right now, I believe. And this is a weird situation where the Mets and the Braves had 2 games postponed, and I think at least one of the games got postponed multiple times, so neither team has played for 3 days, I think. The Mets and Atlanta played one game in that series so far, and I believe that was the Schwellenbach game, and Atlanta won that game, which I called. I said that I leaned to Atlanta in that one. Atlanta pulled back to within 1 game of the Mets by doing that, but now you have a scenario where the Mets and Atlanta, neither of them have played since the 24th, so they both have extended time off, which means they're both going to have access to their full slate of relief pitchers, man. The Mets and Atlanta both are going to have a motivational edge coming into today's game, and they both are probably going to have the bullpen rest edge because the teams have been rested for so long. But when you have that much rest, it might affect your hitting a little bit, and it might affect Atlanta a little bit more just because they're on a win streak, which I will talk about in a minute because it's not going to actually put me off of having a play there on the Atlanta side, which is going to be my one play today. The Mets, I came close to making a play on the Mets because they're in a similar spot, and they lost their last game to the Braves, so that extra time off might break any losing momentum that they might have picked up from that loss. I don't know. But this is a spot where the Mets are up for -115 and -123 as a road favorite at Milwaukee, even though they're going to have to be staying in the dreaded, haunted Milwaukee hotel there that they put their road opponents in. 74% of tickets, so the public's still coming in on the Mets. Public likes the Mets' recent hotness, basically, and for some reason, Milwaukee just is continuously overlooked, man. So we could see Milwaukee maybe do some damage once it comes to the playoffs because nobody's been paying attention to Milwaukee. 87% of the cash on the Mets, so it does look like more of the cash line up to that -123. The market does appear to be indicating on the Mets, even though they are public. Looks like the money is also coming in on that side, but one reason I can't do it, even though the motivational spot and the bullpen rest spot looks like they're both heavily in favor of the Mets here, with Milwaukee, of course, having wrapped up their division a while ago. They have way less to play for than the Mets, who are needing to hold on to a final wildcard spot. But Sean Manaea, good stats on the season, but his stats against Milwaukee are actually not good. So I hesitate to actually want to play on him here. And only 27 at-bats, though, so a small sample size, but they hit 296 off him with a 1,033 OPS. So that's something that gives me hesitation to actually want to jump in on a Sean Manaea start against Milwaukee. On the other side, Frankie Montas, he's definitely the worst of the two pitchers, though. So I still think the Mets do have a starting pitching advantage in this game because Manaea is still better than Montas. His overall stats are way better than Montas's. And I think Montas is actually so bad against the Mets that Manaea's numbers against Milwaukee, as bad as they are still actually slightly better. Yeah, Montas has a 13-7 strikeout walk ratio and 56 at-bats against the Mets, so that's way too many walks. And a 304 batting average, but the OPS is actually lower than Manaea's is because he has not allowed as many extra base hits. Still a high OPS to some extent. It's 792, so Montas has not done well against the Mets either. So I do still lean to the Mets side overall there. San Diego, Arizona is the other game with wild card implications. Like I said, I think Arizona should be the somewhat more motivated team here because they're hanging on up by 1 game. I think they're still likely to get one of those wild card spots. They would have to fall behind both the Mets and Atlanta, but still, I mean, they're going to have to win at least one of these games probably to be a lot more comfortable as they're only up by 1 game. I think they're tied with the Mets, actually. So Actually, they're in the same position as the Mets, really. They really need to win some games to hang on here. Arizona looks very public, and they're down from minus 135 to minus 125. A pretty cheap price on them at home. 89% of the tickets and 91% of the cash. They're so public, and the line looks like it's dropping on them to such an extent that I think the market actually doesn't look like it's indicating on the Arizona side, so I don't want to do it. And Arizona... Oh, I thought they were in a return home spot. They're not, so excuse me for that. I was going to say they're in a bad situational spot, but actually, I don't think they are. Actually, after they lost those 3 games in a row, they were able to beat the Giants in their most recent games, so I think that may help them a little bit gain some new winning momentum from that, break that loss streak. That's probably a good thing. San Diego played yesterday, finishing that pretty big series against the Dodgers, losing that series, so San Diego maybe had a slight bullpen rest advantage here and a travel disadvantage because Arizona's just staying at home, with a day off. And San Diego does not have a day off and they're traveling. So Arizona actually has a little bit of an edge there as well. Having not played yesterday and not having to travel, San Diego, I think is at a bit more of a disadvantage there. Darvish, I think, is probably the lesser of the starting pitchers here too, even though his numbers are good. On the season, he had an extended period of time where he was out for multiple months. He was out with an injury. But then since he's come back, he's actually been fine. He's been good with a 3.15 ERA. All of these starts in September. 21-4 strikeout walk ratio. Hasn't allowed more than 3 earned runs in that Detroit game. And then other than that, he allowed 2 or fewer, although he faced Seattle and the White Sox, so not very impressive. But an impressive 6-inning shutout performance against Houston, although he walked 2 in that game, which wasn't that great, but he's been pitching well since he's come back. Against Arizona, his stats are mediocre, and they do have a ton of history against him. 224 at-bats, and he does have too many walks against them, 20 to 62 strikeouts. So Darvish has been kind of wild against them. He's held them to a pretty low 254 batting average, but a somewhat high 758 OPS because of all the walks and because of 9 home runs. So Arizona has a lot of history against them, and they haven't done that terribly against Darvish. Merrill Kelly, on the other hand, I think he has the starting pitching edge in this game, even though both these guys are actually pretty old at this point. Kelly is actually the slightly younger guy still. He has good numbers on the season as well. Both of these pitchers have ERAs in the 3s and pretty low whips. Kelly is coming off a start where he was taken out of the game because of soreness or something, some sort of slight injury, but he's not missing a start. So they are allowing him to start in his next scheduled start, it looks like. So he's not going to have any time off coming into this game. So he's pitching on his regular rest, which I think may be helpful. It's just a matter of how serious was that injury, because he was pitching well in that Milwaukee game, shutting them out for 5 innings and only allowing 2 base runners, no walks. He was having a good game there, and he's been pitching well in the month of September as well. 22-4 strikeout walk ratio, 2.45 ERA. Had a short start against Texas. That was the worst of those starts, only going 4 innings. The rest of those starts looked pretty good. And he has good stats against San Diego and 156 at-bats. A big sample size there. Too many walks again. So both of these starting pitchers have allowed too many home runs, actually, and walks to these opponents. A 31-16 strikeout walk ratio isn't that good. Both pitchers too wild against these opposing hitters, but Kelly has held San Diego to a 224 average, so lower than what Darvish has held Arizona to, and a 700 OPS, so that's also a little bit lower than Darvish's opposing OPS that he has held Arizona's hitters to. So Arizona, I do think, have the edge in the starting pitching matchup here and in the situational spot and the rest spot here. So I lean to the Arizona side, even though I don't trust Arizona's bullpen really, and the market really doesn't look like it's indicating on it, so keeps me off it a little bit. And then I will talk about my actual play before I get out here. Or actually, I was going to talk about Kansas City as well. Wasn't I? Or is that the game I'm on? I'm all messed up, man. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm on this game, right? Yeah, it's Kansas City, Atlanta. Atlanta is my play today, as I already mentioned, even though we're laying a big price. What's up, guys? JC, how's it going, man? Pistolero, have a good day as well, man. Thanks for dropping in. Atlanta Braves are my one play today. You're laying a run line on this. They're a heavy favorite at minus 190, as you can see here, with 61% of the tickets. 91% of the cash, though, and just kind of sitting at minus 190. Does look like they have a heavy cash percentage on them, more so than what the public betting percentage is, because I think the public is going to look at this and think, wait, both of these starting pitchers have pretty decent numbers. Both of these teams are still fighting for a wild card spot, and think that this is kind of an even matchup here, and think that maybe it's too heavy a favorite price on Atlanta. So I could see the public being enticed by a pretty big underdog money line price on Kansas City, a team that also kind of needs to win this game. But do they actually need to win this game as much as Atlanta does? No, I don't think they do, even though that does mean the pressure is going to be on Atlanta. But like I said, when it's baseball, you don't need them to win by a huge margin, really. Even if you're laying a run line, you're still only asking them to win by 2 runs. So they are still going to be motivated to win the game at the very least. But to knock this price down, I'm taking the run line -1.5 at +114, so you can get it close to like a spread price rather than splitting it. The 190 is so high that I think it just makes sense to take the run line and get like close to a spread price on it. This is a situation where Kansas City, they're going to make the playoffs, man. I mean, I don't think they're really that concerned about this. They're tied with Detroit, sitting 3 games ahead of Minnesota right now, so I don't think Kansas City is as concerned. They're sitting a lot more comfortably than the Braves are here, so the Braves are going to have more motivation here. The Braves sitting 1 game back of the Mets there for that last wild card spot, so the Braves, they're in a much more dire situation, which, yes, it does mean the pressure is on them, but I like the Braves side because I think they have more motivation here than the Royals will. The Braves have extra rest. As I mentioned, they have not played for multiple days because of all these postponements because of the hurricane that's down in Florida and Georgia right now. Atlanta had multiple games postponed. This is going to be weird. Atlanta and the Mets are going to finish the season after their final series. They're going to play 2 games to finish off the series, and probably they'll still be having to determine who's the last wild card. So that's going to get wild as well, man. But that means the Braves have their full bullpen at their disposal. They've had multiple days off. My only concern is because the Braves were hot and they'd won a bunch of games. They'd won 3 in a row. Does that mean it's going to break their winning momentum and kind of hurt their offensive rhythm? It could, because they have too many days off here potentially. But I don't know that it's going to be that much of a concern when they're really going to need to win this game. I think at least they're going to have the edge of having all of their bullpen at their disposal, not having played for multiple days. They're going to have a lot more rest. So I like that part of this. Whereas Kansas City, they played yesterday, I believe, didn't they? Finishing a series against the Nationals where Kansas City swept the series against the Nationals, but they played yesterday, so they don't have any days off. They are carrying momentum into this because they swept the Nationals, but they used some of the back end of their bullpen yesterday to finish off that game. So the bullpen rest scenario is definitely in favor of Atlanta here. The rest scenario is in favor of Atlanta. I think the motivation is in favor of Atlanta because on the other hand, you could say, well, Kansas City getting that sweep have put themselves in a much more comfortable spot here where they can maybe take their foot off their gas a little bit. And then you got Brady Singer, who, as I said, his ERA is good this season. His whip is a little high, close to 1.3 for my liking. So that doesn't mean he's putting too many men on base. He has not been good recently, man. He is not in good form over this past month. 6.43 ERA this month, 18-10 strikeout walk ratio. That's not good. He's coming off a game where he allowed 6 runs, although he allowed 4 home runs, which could be a fluke against San Francisco, but still, he has not been pitching well. In his last 3 starts, he's gone 5 innings, 5 1/3. Granted, one of them was against the Yankees, but still, the other lineups he was facing weren't that imposing, and he didn't do well in any of those starts. The Yankees was actually the better one, really, out of those 3. He's allowed 3 or more runs in all of those starts, so he has not been in good recent form at all. So I worry about Singer struggling right now and appears to be stuck in a rut right now. And up against the Atlanta Braves, they do have 32 at-bats against him, so they've faced him before, and they've spread out 4 home runs off him over that span, even though he does have an 11-2 strikeout walk ratio against him, which isn't that bad. But Atlanta has a 312 batting average off him and 1,134 OPS. So even though it's not a huge sample size, Singer really has not done well against these Atlanta hitters. So Atlanta has done well against them. So Singer, I think that puts him at a disadvantage with the starting pitching matchup as well. And Max Fried actually has the better stats overall, too, with a lower whip. So he's actually having a better season, and he's been much better recently. So he's in much better recent form with a 2.88 ERA this month, 27-5 strikeout walk ratio. He's been pitching much better. He's coming off a good start against Miami. He's allowed 4 or fewer earned runs in all of his starts here. And if you exclude that Washington start, which was a bad start, the rest of the starts were all good, allowing 0, 3, and 1 earned run, and the 3 was against the Dodgers, so not an easy offense to face. Granted, the other 3 offenses were all pretty weak. that he faced this month, but he's still pitching in much better form recently. And up against the Kansas City Royals, 47 at-bat sample size, even though he has walked 6 of them, which isn't great, 11-6 strikeout walk ratio. He has held them to a 213 average, and even with all those walks, 621 OPS. So I think Atlanta has every single advantage in this game, man. Other than the rest maybe kind of hurting their momentum a little bit, Atlanta has an edge in that they're more rested. Their bullpen is more rested, so I think they have the bullpen advantage. They might have the better bullpen as well. Atlanta, I don't know that they have the better offense just because they have so many offensive injuries. I think it's maybe questionable, kind of a wash. But they have more motivation here, better motivational spot, and they have the starting pitcher who's in better form and is the better overall starting pitcher and has the better numbers against the opposing hitters, so they have the better of the starting pitching matchup as well. That plays the Atlanta Braves -1.5, +114. And then we'll talk about college football before I get out here. We have 2 FBS games here, and both of them involve the teams that were involved in that Virginia Tech-Rutgers game, which Rutgers pulled off the mild upset in that game at Virginia Tech. Rutgers, they're a pretty good defensive team, man. I mean, they're not to be overlooked, although we'll talk about their game in a minute because I actually lean against them in their game. But Rutgers, yeah, they were able to upset Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech had some kind of embarrassing plays in that game. There was one where that was making the rounds where their quarterback pulled like a Dan Orlovsky and fumbled it, I think, out of the back of the end zone for a safety. I don't know what the deal was with that. Virginia Tech, I lean to their side in their game against Miami, even though it does appear to be a bit of a mismatch with Virginia Tech being the worst of the 2 teams for sure. But Virginia Tech, I don't think they're that bad of a team, man. And I think they're returning a lot of their guys from last year where they had a pretty successful season last year. They had a bowl win, but they started off this season with a really ugly loss to Vanderbilt, which looks like a stain. And people are going to look at this and think, well, they played their two actual like big conference opponents, Vandy and Rutgers. They didn't do well against either of those teams. Yeah, they lost both of them, but they did lose both of them by 1 score. Maybe they got distracted in that Rutgers game. Maybe they were looking ahead to this big matchup against Miami. This is going to be their ACC opener, and it's a primetime game, Friday night on the road. I think Virginia Tech is a little bit less used to playing in this scenario than Miami is. So Virginia Tech maybe will be a little bit more pumped about it than Miami will be. Miami's just coming off so many blowouts, dude, but I don't think you can take away much from many of them. I mean, they beat Florida in their first week. That was an SEC opponent, but Florida looks like they're a struggling team. South Florida, I mean, they play decently competitively, but still, Miami, if anything, Miami has faced the weaker slate, the weaker schedule so far than Virginia Tech has. As weird as it is to say, neither team has faced a very strong slate of opponents so far, but Miami's just blowing teams out, and they're putting up really impressive scores, offensive numbers, but for the most part, they're doing it against unimpressive defenses. So I don't know how much we can really take away from that. So the public is, of course, going to be heavily on Miami. They're up from 16.5 juiced up to 17.5, so you can get a better number on Virginia Tech if you like it. 86% of tickets, but 89% of the cash on Miami. I don't trust that cash percentage, though, or the fact that the line has moved up a little bit. They're so heavily public, and I think you're not going to be getting value on Miami as the 5th-ranked team in the country, which I think they're being overrated at 5th in the country, or 7th, excuse me. I don't think they're actually a top 10 team. Everybody's saying this is like the resurgence of Miami. They're a good team, but they really have not shown anything yet with the slate of opponents that they've faced. They haven't faced anybody great yet, so it still remains to be seen. And Virginia Tech, I think at least has more returning starters from last year's team than Miami does. Miami's having to use a new quarterback this year, although they brought him over from Washington State. I think they have Cam Ward, and he's off to the races. He's been good, but I think those high point totals mean that there's not going to be any value to be found on the Miami side or on an over in this game, and the total has dropped from 56.5 to 54. Total not that high for a college football game, so even though Miami's been scoring a lot, odds makers are kind of telling you that they don't expect Miami to score as many points in this one. Maybe they'll struggle a little bit more against a better Virginia Tech team, which may be the best defense that Miami has faced so far this year. Probably it is. 65% of the tickets on the over and only 61% of the cash on the over. So the market read does look like it's more towards the under there in that one. So that's how I look at that game. No plays on these. And then Washington, Rutgers. Rutgers, as I said, they're coming off that win over Virginia Tech. That was a big win for Rutgers, man. Going into an ACC school and beating Virginia Tech, pretty big game. And Virginia Tech made mistakes in that game. I don't know what the turnover margin was in there. I don't know if the final score was at all misleading. But I believe Rutgers came into that game off of a bye or something. They've already had a bye. Rutgers really did not put up an impressive offense. Or no, they did actually. Excuse me. It was all on the ground. Excuse me, Rutgers can't really throw the ball, but they put up a lot of rushing yards, I think, in the game. Actually, it looks like it was more balanced than I thought, but they had the benefit of 3 Virginia Tech turnovers, too, and they still only won by 3, even though they did outgame Virginia Tech by 100 yards. So they did still outplay Virginia Tech. I thought that maybe it was a turnover scenario, which they did still have the benefit of a lot of turnovers. This is an interesting game, man. Rutgers is down from -3 to -1.5, and it looks like the market move, I know for a fact from listening to professionals that there is legitimate money that has come in on the Washington side. It sounds like there are a lot of professionals on the Washington side that have driven this line down, even though you see Washington being public with 69% of tickets and only 60% of the cash. So it gives me hesitation just because Washington is still carrying that weight around their name from last year where they had their great offense last year and they made the championship game last year and everybody kind of still thinks that that's what Washington is, but it is not this year. I mean, they lost that entire offense from last year, but I also don't think Washington is that bad. So it's kind of a mix because I think you still have the public thinking that this is the same Washington team as last year, but then you have other guys who will look at Washington's schedule and say, well, this is not impressive. I mean, they haven't beaten anybody that good. They haven't played any really good offenses, and they lost in their game as a favorite. They got upset in the big rivalry game against Washington State. Although, as I mentioned, Washington State had a turnover benefit in that game. I'm pretty sure Washington actually outgained Washington State in that game, so that game wasn't as bad as it looks. So it's a weird situation where I think some people are overvaluing Washington because they think Washington is still what they saw out of them last year, and some people are looking at what Washington has done this year and undervaluing them. So this is just a bizarre situation. I don't want to get involved in this. This is Washington's first Big Ten game. Or no, it isn't. Excuse me. They already started Big Ten play last week with a home game against Northwestern. I mentioned that I thought it was a better spot for Washington just because Northwestern was going into unfamiliar territory. They're not used to playing in Washington. Washington, very weird that they're being a Big Ten team here. Now they're having to travel all the way to the East Coast. And they do have Michigan up next. So that could be a look ahead, even though they have a bye in between the two, I believe. Or no, they don't actually. They just have extra time off because they're playing on Thursday this week, I think. So I think that is actually next week they're playing Michigan. So that could be a big look ahead for Washington, dude. So there are definitely conflicting factors on this game. I don't think the fact that they're traveling to the East Coast is going to be that bad as far as a travel spot is concerned. I think that gets factored in too much by some people. But the fact that they're not familiar with playing at Rutgers, I think that could give Rutgers a little bit of an edge there because Washington's not used to going there. So there are so many conflicting indicators here. And then, like I said, this could be a huge look-ahead spot because that's championship revenge up next week. Washington against Michigan, even though these teams are not the same as they were last year. Washington still might have that game circled, man, because, again, that's the championship rematch. So that could be cause for a look-ahead there. So that look ahead makes it, I think, not a very good spot for Washington either. So this is a really, really hard game to gauge situationally with factors on both sides here. So I don't know what to do with this game at all. And then the total is low in this game, very low for a college football game, 43.5 up to 44.5. I actually think Washington's defense may have improved since last year, and their offense is probably not as good as it was last year, although I think it's still capable. And Rutgers is actually a good defensive team, and they kind of struggle offensively, so that's what's going on with this total here. 64% of tickets and only 51% of the cash are on the over in this one, so I lean to the under in this one as well. And if I was forced to pick a side, I don't even know if I would lean to Washington, man. I certainly would not want to take it at less value here. The line got down from 3 to 1.5. I don't think I would want to take 1.5 when you could have gotten 3 with Washington. At that point, it might even make more sense to lay it with Rutgers and just play on the fact that Washington is too public at this point, and the Washington has a big look ahead to Michigan next week. So I don't agree with the professional bettors as strongly, the ones that are on the Washington side, even though you got to respect the fact that they are on the Washington side. There are reasons for being on the Washington side from those guys, but I think that look ahead spot is massive enough that I don't like it enough. And I lean to the under. I think the under would be the better way to look in this game more than the side, which the side is very hard to read, very confusing. And you're still getting value potentially on the under because this line has just gone up from 43 to 44.5, 43.5 to 44.5. Public is going to be on the over because, again, Washington has that air around them. They're that really good offense, but this is not the Penix Jr. Washington offense here. So that's how I look at that game. That's going to do it for me, man. Thanks for hanging out, guys, although none of you are left in the chat. Now, Atlanta Braves, my one play, -1.5 on the run line, +114. Follow me, Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. Follow the Tower Gang podcast, of course. The most hilarious offensive podcast on the planet. We're everywhere. And sign up for the Patreon, patreon.com/TowerGang, to get some extra content, pre-shows, post-shows, hang out in the Telegram with us. You know the drill. I got to get out of here. Have a good one, man. For Cole's sake, because he's a Braves fan, and now for my sake, because I have money on them, go Braves. Peace out, guys.